Well, this Valentine's weekend, moviegoers are expected to hit theaters in droves to see the film 50 Shades of Grey. Just what is it about the trilogy of books that has women everywhere feasting on what's been dubbed as mommy porn? Let's take a look.
The 50 Shades of Grey trilogy has sold over 100 million copies, exposing readers worldwide to formerly taboo practices. Shannon Ethridge is a counselor and best-selling author. She says this series is called mommy porn.
This is not a healthy example of what God intended for our sex life to be.
In her book, The Fantasy Fallacy, Shannon exposes the myths behind sexual fantasies and their role within a marriage.
Please welcome to the 700 Club, Shannon Ethridge. Shannon, it's great to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's great to be back with you, Terry.
Talk a little bit, if you will, about this 50 Shades of Grey and why it's resonated with so many women.
Well, it is quite the interesting phenomenon, how it is so appealing to some and appalling to others. But I think the reason that it is appealing to some women is for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think there's been such a void of healthy information within the church and within the family culture, especially about female sexuality. And I think that the other thing is that this is basically a seduction fantasy. And I think that a lot of girls grow up so wanting to be desired and have the attention and affection of their fathers. And so oftentimes they feel abandoned or neglected or even abused. And so this is a story that kind of undoes that damage in her head, thinking that she's not desirable.
You share in the book so many, I guess, explanations of some of the things that people fantasize about. What are sexual fantasies in your definition, and are they necessarily bad?
Well, they're not necessarily bad. God wired our brains in such a way that we could entertain sexual fantasies, I think, to compartmentalize pain and make room for pleasure, because your brain can't process pain and pleasure at the exact same time. Yeah. And so I set out on a journey to try to figure out, what are sexual fantasies? What do they represent? And what role do they play? And what I learned is that sexual fantasies are really the brain's way of trying to heal itself from past trauma. So we're trying to recreate a scenario in order to win this time, or regain something that was lost. It's quite the deep psychological study.
But here's the odd part of that to me is, I mean, you counsel people. So when someone comes for counseling, they're wanting to counsel to get to an end result. But it doesn't seem like that happens with this. It seems like the fantasy just goes on, or does it need to be addressed, or how do you get to a conclusion of something that's healthy from this?
Well, I want to help people understand that fantasy is not a roadmap to future fulfillment. It's a roadmap of your rocky past. And if I can help them understand where the original trauma was, then they can heal that trauma and not feel the need to act that fantasy out. Because fantasies are better left as fantasies. When you turn them into a reality, they have a way of wreaking havoc in your life, your relationships, your marriage, your family.
Well, talk a little bit about your own life. And I know that you counsel women who, you know, have had fantasies, and you've experienced some of this in your own life.
Yeah, I was really confused and bewildered when my counselor in my 20s had me sit down and make a list of all the people that I had been inappropriate with. What surfaced for me is that they were all either significantly older than me or in some form of authority over me, which told me that I was looking for a father figure, which told me I need to reconnect with my own earthly father and develop a healthier relationship with him than I was able to have as a child. And it also told me that I was craving a heavenly father. And so it took me deeper into my spiritual life, and I think that that's kind of the silver lining behind this 50 Shades of Grey phenomenon. We can help people get more in touch with their wounds and their spirituality.
I've heard that there are even some women who have actually divorced their husbands because the husbands won't engage in this sexual fantasizing with them. Is that true?
Unfortunately, it is true, and it absolutely breaks my heart. We have to understand that, you know, men are scared of this. I mean, there's a part of them that's probably titillated, and there's another part that's scared to death.
So odd to me. I mean,
right,
it's like role reversal or
something. Exactly. That's exactly what's happening. And women need to understand that we have to be respectful of our husband's boundaries. And if he doesn't feel comfortable acting that out, then we have to honor that. The same way that we would want him to honor us and the boundaries that we set, we have to show him the same respect.
You know, you said earlier that sexual fantasies aren't always a negative thing, but most of the people in your book that you counseled or addressed came to you because they were uncomfortable with the fact that they were experiencing this.
Right. Well, understand that people who come to me, they're confused and bewildered by why they would fantasize about the things that they do because it's so out of line with their spiritual values. The reality is that we often fantasize about things that are very forbidden, and we wonder why in the world would we even entertain that thought. But again, it goes back to those deep traumatic wounds. If you were to make a list of all the traumas that a person experienced in their life and then make a list of their fantasies, they're often mirror images of one another, which tells you what the role really is.
The confusion to me in all of this is, and I see it in our culture today in so many ways, how do we, if we engage in all of this, how do we experience genuine intimacy with a person that we truly love? It just seems like it's a lot of peripheral baggage.
Absolutely. It can create so much distraction. I think that this whole trilogy, the movie, has a potential to do as much damage in a marriage relationship as it possibly could do good. And I know that a lot of women are out there going, but I need to spice up my marriage. I need to awaken my sexual desires because I'm so not interested. There are much better ways to do that. In fact, I think prayer together is the best aphrodisiac possible.
Yeah. What's the church's role in all of this? I mean, we live in a culture where almost nothing is sacred anymore.
Right, and we're so told, good girls don't, good girls don't. That's basically all the information that we get in the church. We aren't really taught that we're not just spiritual beings, we're sexual beings, and that our spirituality and our sexuality are two sides of the same coin, but they can be integrated together. We can take our thoughts captive and make those obedient to Christ and have a much richer marriage relationship as a result. And so I think it's the church's responsibility to educate couples and for women to be speaking to women and men to be speaking to men about this phenomenon.
Good point there. The fantasy fallacy. You've written this book. It's out at an appropriate time with the movie coming out this weekend. What do you want people to take away from it?
I'm really hoping that this will open lines of communication wide, especially among women. Again, there's been such a void of information about healthy female sexuality. And what breaks my heart about this phenomenon is how women are really at odds at each other. They're throwing stones at each other because, oh, you're frigid if you won't go see it, but oh, you're too loose if you are going to see it. Let's stop with the name calling and the stone throwing, and let's just see what we can learn about sexual fantasy that will create a healthier society. Because if every single person on the planet examined their sexual fantasies and learned what is the root of that trauma and how can I be healed from that, think about all the things that would no longer be an issue. Extramarital affairs, sexual harassment, incest, rape, abortion, the list could go on and on. And so I actually think that what Satan intended for evil, God is so using for good if we can open those lines of communication and talk about this.
It's the way that he works.
Exactly.
Well, it certainly is a fascinating subject. Shannon's book is called The Fantasy Fallacy. It is available wherever books are sold, and it talks about how we can take something in our culture today that can be perceived as very negative and understand ourselves and draw closer to the Lord.